The sun was setting over the stone walls of Ravensmoor Castle, casting long shadows across the courtyard where the banners of House Blackthorn fluttered in the wind. On this day, the village believed a marriage would unite two powerful families and seal an era of peace. But centuries later, chroniclers would whisper that the wedding itself was a harbinger of death that the halls which once rang with. Celebration became the stage for a nightmare no one could have foreseen. The bride, Lady Isolde, was famed not only for her beauty, but for a lineage steeped in strange tales. Her ancestors had been accused of witchcraft, of speaking with spirits in the dead of night, and though the church had pardoned them long ago, the shadows of superstition clung to her family like a second skin. Her groom, Sir Alaric, was a knight whose victories in battle had earned him a reputation for bravery, but also for cruelty. Villagers remembered his eyes as cold, like steel under a blackened sky, and they muttered that such men were ill-suited to carry love into a home. Preparations for the wedding were elaborate. Torches lined the path to the chapel, priests intoned blessings in Latin, and servants moved through the halls with careful precision. Outside, the townspeople watched from a distance, hoping for a moment of joy, unaware that fate had already begun its silent march. For in the night before the wedding, an old crone had appeared at the gates, her hair white as ash, eyes glowing faintly with an unnatural light. She offered no blessings, only a warning. Blood will mark the union. The hall will remember. The curse will awaken. Guards laughed. The families ignored her. Only Lady Isolde's younger sister, Honora, shivered and whispered that some warnings were meant to be heard. The wedding day dawned with a pale sky, the air thick with mist. Nobles arrived in their finest garments, trumpets heralded the procession, and for a fleeting hour, the castle seemed alive with laughter. The priest began the ceremony, reading vows that promised love, fidelity, and prosperity. Yet as Isolde's fingers touched Alaric's, a hush fell across the crowd. Some claimed it was the wind. Others swore they heard a faint echo of a woman's scream carried through the stone corridors. The villagers' eyes darted nervously, but the ceremony continued. Feasting followed in the great hall, long tables covered in silver and embroidered cloths, the aroma of roasted meats and spiced bread filling the air. Servants hurried between guests, pouring wine and carrying platters, while musicians played lutes and flutes. And yet, for all the merriment, the hall carried a subtle tension. Guests reported shadows moving where no one stood, and the sound of a door creaking open in empty corridors. The minstrels themselves faltered, their melodies trembling as if the stones of Ravensmoor absorbed their fear and reflected it back. By evening, as the candles burned low, Lady Isolde retired briefly to her chambers to rest before the final dances. There she noticed a pattern carved into the wall, behind the tapestry a strange sigil she had never seen. Its lines twisted like thorned vines, and it radiated an almost imperceptible coldness. Though unnerved, she dismissed it as a remnant of the castle's ancient past. But outside her window, the crone's warning seemed to whisper again through the mist. The blood will bind what joy cannot. The first sign of terror came unexpectedly. A scream echoed from the kitchens. A servant had discovered one of the cooks collapsed, eyes wide in horror, lips frothing as if tasting unseen poison. Panic rippled through the hall. The lords and ladies tried to maintain composure, attributing it to stress or fainting. Yet whispers began circulating, and some swore they had seen shadows detached from walls lurking behind columns. Others murmured that the crone's curse was at work. The union itself had angered forces older than the castle. As night deepened, the curse revealed its nature. Guests reported visions, fleeting flashes of red across the tapestries, the clinking of chains in empty rooms, and a low moan carried through the stone corridors. Lady Isolde awoke to the sensation of being watched. Her mirror reflected her own face, pale and trembling, yet behind her in the glass she saw a figure she did not recognize, a woman draped in black, her eyes hollow, pointing toward the door. When Isolde turned, no one stood there. That night, many of the wedding party would claim they too saw figures moving unseen, and that an oppressive darkness seemed to settle over the hall like a living thing. By midnight, the first tragedy struck. Sir Alaric, seeking to calm fears, had gathered the remaining guests for a toast. As the silver goblets were lifted, a strange, pungent odor filled the hall. Some fell to the ground, choking. Others screamed. Panic turned to chaos. Candles extinguished mysteriously, leaving shadows to dance along walls. And the arches of the hall echoed with cries of terror. Lady Isolde fled to her chambers, but the doors were locked from outside. From the hallway came the sound of hurried footsteps. Then, silence. No one knew what had become of Alaric. By dawn, Ravensmoor Castle was a scene of devastation. Guests had vanished or were found unconscious in corridors. Some injured, some babbling incoherently about the bride's eyes glowing in the dark. The villagers who dared approach were met with silence. Save for a faint echo of musiclutes, flutes, and a voice singing a lullaby in a language none could understand. When the castle doors finally opened, the halls were empty, save for Lady Isolde herself. Sitting on the dais, eyes wide and unblinking, a single drop of blood tracing down her hand from a small, unseen cut. No one knew how long she had been there, what horrors had unfolded behind the closed doors. The tale of Ravensmoor's wedding spread across the countryside. Chronicles spoke of a curse awakened, of a hall that remembered the blood spilled within it, of guests who never returned to their families. Over the years, historians debated whether the events were real or exaggerated, but the locals never forgot. They left offerings at the gates, prayed for protection, and warned young brides never to set foot in that hall. And though centuries passed, the castle retained an aura of dread, as if the stones themselves carried memory. As dawn's first light crept through the shattered windows of Ravensmoor Castle, the hall lay in eerie silence. The air was thick with the scent of iron and damp stone. The shadows from the previous night seemed to cling stubbornly to the walls. Lady Isolde remained on the dais, pale and silent, her hair tangled, her gown torn. Yet her eyes held a strange lucidity, as if she alone remembered the events that had consumed the rest of the wedding party. The villagers who dared enter the courtyard recoiled, muttering prayers under their breath, and the castle gates were promptly barred by those who feared the unknown. For days, rumors swirled like the morning fog. Servants and soldiers who had survived or claimed to. Servif spoke of a curse that had awakened, the moment Isolde's hand touched. Alaric's they described visions of shadowed figures moving independently of their owners, walls weeping with dampness that looked disturbingly like blood, and a melody carried through the hall that seemed alive, whispering names of those yet to perish. Chroniclers of the time were both horrified and fascinated, recording every detail with a mix of fear and disbelief. Some claimed that the castle itself had become sentient, absorbing the anguish of its occupants and reflecting it back in spectral echoes. Lady Isolde, meanwhile, did not speak for 3 days. When she finally raised her voice, it was not to recount horrors, but to warn the villagers. The curse was not simply a product of superstition. It was a legacy, she said, one that had been placed upon her bloodline generations ago by an ancestor wronged in love and betrayed by ambition. The words struck terror into even the most rational minds. She claimed that the castle had been constructed atop a convergence of ancient power, that the halls themselves remembered acts of betrayal and greed, and that the marriage intended to unite two families had triggered the latent wrath of the curse. As the sun set on the 3rd day, Lady Isolde vanished. Some say she fled into the forests surrounding Ravensmoor, guided by shadows only she could see. Others insist the castle itself swallowed her, drawing her into hidden passages that even its builders had not documented. When the villagers ventured inside, the great hall was empty except for a single overturned goblet, a streak of blood leading to the dais, and faint footprints that vanished into solid stone. Over time, these signs became the basis of legend, the bride who survived a night of unimaginable horror, only to disappear and leave behind a castle haunted by memory itself. The story of Ravensmoor did not die with her. Over the centuries, historians, treasure hunters, and scholars visited the castle, drawn by accounts of blood-soaked halls and whispers of an undying curse. Archaeologists in the 18th century uncovered remnants of the feast, skeletal remains of animals, and fragments of armor scattered as though a violent struggle had taken place. Yet the most chilling finds were the carvings on the walls, symbols that appeared suddenly in sections of the hall, should have been plain. The sigils depicted spirals, interlocking triangles, and blood-red stains that could not be attributed to ordinary iron oxide. Some theorized that Lady Isolda's family had inscribed warnings, others that the curse itself left a mark upon the stone, an echo of the terror that had occurred centuries before. In modern times, the legend has taken on new life. Tourists walk the cold stone floors, cameras in hand, capturing images of hallways that seem longer than they are, shadows that refuse to behave naturally, and occasional cold drafts that sweep across rooms with no open windows. Paranormal investigators claim that recordings reveal faint murmurs, footsteps in empty corridors, and the sound of music strangely sweet yet unplaceable playing where no instruments exist. Skeptics argue natural causes, but even they admit the weight of history feels palpable. The castle itself seems to remember, holding on to moments that should have been lost to time. The wedding that ended in blood has become more than a story of terror. It is a study in human ambition and the consequences of disregarding warning. Lady Isolda's fate serves as a reminder that some legacies cannot be ignored, that the past has a way of echoing through stone and memory, and that curses, whether born of magic or the collective dread of a people, have a remarkable endurance. Ravensmoor Castle stands today not as a monument to marriage or celebration, but as a silent witness to events that the world tried to forget, a warning to anyone who dares to step too lightly upon the ground where power, pride, and fear intersect. Even now, when the sun dips low and shadows lengthen across the courtyard, visitors swear they see a figure in white watching from the dais, her face pale, her eyes reflecting centuries of sorrow and warning. And if one listens closely, beneath the wind whistling through the battlements, there is a faint, almost imperceptible melodia lullaby carried through time, a song of a wedding that ended in blood and a curse that refused to die. Ravensmoor remains a castle frozen in both stone and story, an eternal reminder that some nights are never truly over, that some curses endure far longer than the lives they touch, and that history itself sometimes speaks in whispers that only the brave or the foolish dare to hear. The hall is empty, yet full, silent, yet alive, a place where the past does not rest, and where the memory of that fateful wedding night continues to haunt every corridor, every shadow, and every flicker of torchlight, reminding all who enter that some legacies cannot be contained, some warnings cannot be ignored, and some blood once spilled will never truly be washed away.